Around 1:30 a.m. on January 21st, 2022, somebody opened fire on a birthday gathering inside a rented house on North Park Avenue. Breahna Stines had just turned 20. Her older sister Marneysha Hamilton was there beside her, and more than 40 rounds were ripped through the celebration. By the time police reached that Inglewood block, 4 people were dead. 1 man was critically wounded, and the party had become something investigators could not explain quickly. What made it stranger was that similar decisions would surface in 4 other cities, where crews chased revenge, crossed neighborhoods, or showed up hunting people who were never there. To understand how that shooting reached Carla's stairs, you have to know who was actually standing around that West 2nd Street house. Carla had opened her home for a 4th of July gathering, where relatives, friends, teenagers, and 1 small child moved through the property. Her 19-year-old son, Junior, Sykes Salinas, was there with 19-year-old April Snuggles Onofre, his girlfriend who was about 5 months pregnant. The couple had already chosen J. Salinas Onofre as their son's name, giving the night a future nobody expected to lose. 18-year-old Ruben Malt Alcantara was also there, while Jesse and family friend Rodrigo stayed nearby as midnight approached. Marishella had brought her 6-year-old daughter Angelina, adding another family layer to a gathering spread between the steps, doorway, and yard. Carla's other son Joseph was missing from the celebration since he was incarcerated during the holiday and documented as a Rockwood member. That connection mattered through Maricela, who had previously dated Joseph and understood the gang markings covering walls, alleys, dumpsters, and buildings around Westlake. She knew enough street politics to recognize Diablo tagging, even though most people at Carla's barbecue were not documented gang members. Junior, April, and Ruben moved around tagging culture, but none of the 3 were documented members of either Rockwood or Diablo. Junior ran with a tagging crew called NDU, meaning Never Disrespect Us, while April used Snuggles or Snugs inside the local graffiti scene. Ruben belonged to another crew called MIH, short for Making It Happen, placing all 3 inside Westlake's street culture without making them Rockwood. That distinction could blur where tagging crews, gangs, friendships, family ties, and territorial boundaries occupied the same few blocks. These teenagers were not documented Rockwood targets, yet they were celebrating beside somebody else's long-running border. That location would matter more than almost anything happening inside the party once people started moving through the alley behind Carla's property. Carla's house stood inside territory associated with Rockwood, while the alley immediately behind her property divided that ground from territory claimed by DIA. That alley looked ordinary to outsiders, yet locals familiar with Westlake understood what waited on either side of the boundary. The line was not painted across pavement, but tags, affiliations, personal histories, and old confrontations gave it more meaning than an official marker. Maricella's relationship with Joseph had taught her how to read those signs, so Diablo markings nearby carried information she understood quickly. The family therefore lived beside a dispute they did not create, while their backyard touched the route linking 2 increasingly hostile crews. To understand why that alley carried so much weight, the story has to widen beyond Carla's property toward Westlake and MacArthur Park. Westlake sits just west of downtown Los Angeles, packed into roughly 2.5 square miles surrounding one of the city's best-known parks. During the 1980s, refugees escaping wars in El Salvador and Guatemala settled heavily into subdivided apartments throughout the neighborhood. That migration increased an already dense population, while gangs and street economies expanded across blocks where poverty and displacement kept different groups close together. MacArthur Park gradually became associated with drug dealing, gambling, sex work, gang taxation, and violence that stretched into surrounding residential streets. MS-13 also emerged from this broader Westlake environment during the 1980s among Salvadoran teenagers facing pressure from established Mexican-American gangs nearby. The neighborhood later became tied to the LAPD Rampart Division, whose corruption scandal damaged trust throughout the same streets officers patrolled. In 2002, LAPD, FBI, ATF, DEA, and IC personnel joined a major crackdown focused heavily around MacArthur Park. By roughly 2005, conditions around the park had improved, although gang territory remained active through apartments, side streets, alleys, and surrounding blocks. Cleaning up one public space did not settle every street beef sitting only a few blocks away. especially where rival crews still claimed residential ground. Those surviving territorial lines included Rockwood, whose beginnings sounded nothing like the gang later associated with serious Westlake street violence. Rockwood Street Locos, also known as Barrio Rockwood Street, RSL, RRWST, reportedly formed during the 1970s as a neighborhood football club. Young Latino men around Rockwood Street organized teams and played other neighborhood groups, building local identity through sports before the environment changed. During the 1980s, that organization shifted as gang activity, crack sales, firearms, and territorial competition spread throughout Los Angeles. By the 1990s, Rockwood had become a street gang fighting a serious war with the Columbia Lil Psychos clique from 18th Street. As Rockwood expanded, its structure became associated with Westmoreland's, Hartford Dukes, Lil Psychos, Pequeños, Downowns, 6th and Union Gangstas, plus Crazy Town. Crazy Town carried an important detail, since it had originally existed as a separate tagging crew called Kings Taken Over, usually shortened to KTO. Rockwood eventually absorbed KTO, showing how an independent graffiti crew could become part of a stronger neighborhood organization once street pressure increased. That pattern would later matter for DIA, another Westlake tagging crew, growing beside Rockwood while trying to maintain its own identity. By then, the neighborhood was already showing how tagging, territory, and gang membership could slide into one another over time. By 2012, Rockwood's presence had become tied strongly enough to specific properties that Los Angeles officials began targeting buildings rather than only individuals. Then City Attorney Carmen Trutanich filed nuisance abatement lawsuits involving 3 Whitmer Street apartment buildings connected to Rockwood activity in Westlake. That move showed how deeply Rockwood had become tied to particular addresses, buildings, alleys, and blocks across its section of Westlake. For smaller crews nearby, that pressure could mean getting absorbed, pushed away, or becoming organized enough to defend separate ground. One of those smaller groups was already developing inside the same neighborhood, carrying a name that would eventually become inseparable from Carla's Alley. DIA emerged from that same 1990s tagging world, reportedly beginning as a graffiti crew whose name stood for Down in Action. Like other tag banger groups from that period, its early identity centered on putting names across walls, buses, freeway structures, and neighborhood surfaces. Over time, some Los Angeles tagging crews adopted guns, drug sales, territorial behavior, and the violent reputation associated with established street gangs. DIA followed that broader progression until people increasingly recognized the crew as Diablo. Although its relationship with Rockwood was not hostile from the start, members from both groups reportedly coexisted for years, while some people connected to DIA were even recruited into Rockwood's ranks. That earlier cooperation makes the later bloodshed more important, since Rockwood and DIA did not begin as automatic enemies, separated by generations. They shared the same cramped Westlake environment, moved around neighboring streets, understood the same tagging culture, and faced 18th Street pressure nearby. Carla's house eventually sat beside the line separating them, while Joseph's Rockwood affiliation gave her family an indirect connection to one side. Junior April, Ruben, Jesse, Rodrigo, Maricela, and Angelina would later occupy that property during the rivalry's worst possible moment. Before reaching that night, one question still mattered most. How did 2 neighboring crews that once coexisted turn the same alley into enemy ground? Rockwood and DIA had not always treated each other like enemies, since people connected to both sides once moved through the same Westlake streets without open warfare. Some DIA members were reportedly recruited into Rockwood, showing that the relationship had once been close enough for individuals to cross from one circle into another. According to the account later attached to this rivalry, Rockwood leadership eventually gave DIA a choice between joining completely or becoming another enemy on the neighborhood map. DIA refused that demand, then hardened into the Diablo gang while holding a narrow stretch of territory squeezed between Rockwood and 18th Street. That decision left Diablo surrounded by 2 hostile neighborhoods, creating the kind of street pressure where disrespect, tagging, drug money, or crossed boundaries could quickly become personal. By the time Steve, Happy Shem, entered that world, The older dispute had already developed rules, names, enemies, and people trusted to handle business for the crew. Shem later told investigators he had grown up around a DIA member named Alan Clue, although his deeper involvement started after meeting William Vasquez during 2016. William, known around the crew as Chucky, gradually brought Shem around Jonathan Forrest Vasquez, Gerardo, Shy Boy Ferrardo, Art Casper Tobias, Mario Pen Ruiz, plus Jason Boxer. Shem described that circle as armed, involved with drugs, and organized enough for certain members to control money while others handled street assignments. Within that structure, William stood above the others in Shem's account, while Jonathan, or Jason, could take charge whenever William was unavailable. Shem also said the money kept him interested, especially after drug sales started bringing him roughly $3,000 to $4,000 during an average month. About $1,000 from that amount went back to William for restocking product, which Shem described as re-upping the crew's supply. By April 2017, Shem considered himself formally initiated into DIA, although he said he skipped the traditional beating after already proving his loyalty through time and money. The nickname Happy came from his habit of smiling, which sounded harmless besides street names like Chucky, Casper, Shy Boy, Forrest, Boxer, and Penn. Underneath those names, however, Shem described men carrying firearms regularly while maintaining a structure built for drugs, retaliation, territorial control, and avoiding police attention. That organization became clearer whenever somebody wanted to move against a rival, since Shem described operations that could involve 3 separate vehicles working different positions. If one car might carry the shooter, another could watch surrounding streets, while a third remained farther out looking for police or anything that could interrupt the mission. William allegedly assigned those roles, then supplied walkie-talkies so members could communicate without creating the same location trail produced by ordinary cellular calls. That system would matter later when detectives started finding several DIA-linked vehicles moving together around 2 different shootings, only months apart. For the moment, though, those tactics remained inside the crew, while Rockwood stayed the enemy closest to Diablo's territory, with 18th Street pressing from another direction. The 4th of July in 2018 brought both sides of the story into the same night, although Carla's family had started their evening with nothing resembling a retaliation mission. Her Westlake home filled with relatives and friends celebrating around food, music, fireworks, plus the steady movement of people coming through during the holiday. Junior Sykes Salinas stayed near his girlfriend April Snuggles Onofre, who was 5 months pregnant with the boy they already planned to name Jay, Salinas Onofre. Ruben Malt Alcantara was also there, while Jesse, Rodrigo, Marishella, and 6-year-old Angelina moved around the property as the gathering continued toward midnight. Joseph, Carla's documented Rockwood son, remained incarcerated elsewhere that night, yet his affiliation still connected Maricela closely enough to recognize the territorial signs surrounding the house. Several miles of streets away, another 4th of July gathering was happening at William Vasquez's parents' home, where Shem said multiple DIA members spent part of the evening together. Shem later remembered William carrying a .40 caliber handgun, while Jonathan had a 9mm, details that would become much more important once detectives examined the shell casings afterward. Around 11 p.m., Shem said William started talking about going out to search for Rockwood members, turning the night from hanging out into something far more organized. Shem claimed he had been drinking and using drugs heavily enough that he stayed behind, eventually falling asleep inside his own vehicle. The others started moving through Westlake while Carla's family remained outside, leaving 2 separate gatherings headed toward the same small section of neighborhood territory. Surveillance cameras later showed a Gold Akira legend circulating through the area before the shooting, giving investigators their first mechanical witness to those movements around West of 2nd Street. At one point, 3 people stepped from that car and vandalized a dumpster with graffiti before climbing back inside and continuing through the neighborhood. Other footage later captured 3 figures walking toward Carla's house, then running away less than a minute afterward before entering a separate white vehicle. Investigators also identified a dark-colored minivan moving with the other cars, which they later interpreted as another piece of the rolling lookout arrangement Shem described. None of those recordings clearly showed enough facial detail to settle who occupied every position, although the vehicles created a pattern detectives could eventually follow. Back at Carla's house, Jesse later remembered Junior mentioning that a gold car had been circling the block shortly before midnight, although nobody yet knew what that observation meant. The detail only became important afterward, once investigators compared his memory with surveillance showing the Gold Acura legend making repeated movements through the same Westlake streets. Marneysha had another reason to stay alert, since her history with Joseph had taught her how to recognize DIA tags around Rockwood territory without needing anybody to explain them. She later testified that somebody at the gathering mentioned Mario Pen Ruiz being nearby, prompting her to move 6-year-old Angelina farther inside the house. That decision placed Marneysha near the doorway, while the rest of the gathering slowly thinned around the steps, gate, and small outdoor area. By then, Carla, Junior, and April were sitting along the side steps while Ruben remained nearby talking with Jesse and Rodrigo shortly before the clock crossed midnight. Marneysha stayed close to the entrance after bringing Angelina indoors, which left several people gathered within a tight space bordered by railings, stairs, and the front gate. Behind the property, the same alley separating Rockwood territory from Diablo ground opened directly toward the neighborhood boundary that had shaped this rivalry for years. 3 figures soon emerged from that direction, moving from the alley toward Carla's property while the people outside remained concentrated around the stairway. The old Rockwood and Diablo dispute had finally reached Carla's doorstep, although almost everybody waiting there had no idea who those approaching men were looking for. At roughly 12:10 a.m. on July 5th, 2018, the 3 figures from the alley finally reached the outdoor stairs behind Carla's West of 2nd Street home. According to the later reconstruction, one of the approaching men yelled an insult aimed at Rockwood before gunfire started ripping through the people gathered near the gate. Jesse would later tell detectives he heard well over 20 shots, which made sense once investigators started counting shell casings across multiple positions. The shooters had approached on foot rather than firing from a passing vehicle, putting them close enough to spray the stairwell from only a short distance away. Within seconds, a holiday gathering filled with family members, young friends, and one 6-year-old child had turned into a cramped shooting scene with almost nowhere to move. Marneysha had already pushed Angelina farther inside after hearing Mario Pen Ruiz might be nearby, which placed her close to the doorway when the first rounds came through. She tried moving back toward her daughter, but a bullet struck her leg before she could make it completely inside the house. Rodrigo took a round through his back, yet he remained mobile enough to reach the interior, where he found Marneysha bleeding on the living room floor. Even while wounded himself, Rodrigo got onto the telephone and gave dispatchers the address so emergency crews could locate the property quickly. Those movements inside the house were happening while several people outside remained trapped between the stairs, railings, gate, and shooters positioned above them. Carla took 5 bullets during the attack, with rounds striking both legs, both sides of her hip area, plus her face. Her son, Junior, Sykes Salinas, was hit 8 times, including wounds around his chin and forehead, leaving him dead before rescuers could save him. April Snuggles. Onofre, Junior's 19-year-old girlfriend, suffered 4 gunshot wounds to her torso and head while standing inside the same concentrated shooting zone. Ruben Malt Alcantara was struck 6 times, with 2 bullets piercing his intestines and pancreas, creating wounds that would prove fatal. By the time officers started securing the property, the 3 teenagers who had been talking, eating, and hanging around only minutes earlier were beyond saving. Paramedics then learned April was roughly 5 months pregnant, adding another emergency that could not be treated like the other wounds around the house. They checked for fetal signs of life at the scene, but none were present for the son April, and Junior had already named J. Salinas Onofre. That left Junior, April, Ruben, and the unborn baby dead from one attack, while Carla, Marneysha, and Rodrigo survived with serious gunshot injuries. None of the evidence available in the case identifies which individual shooter fired each fatal round that struck Junior, April, Ruben, or the unborn child. What investigators could establish much more clearly was that several firearms had been discharged from separate spots along the stairway during the same burst of violence. Once the wounded were transported, criminalists started working backward through a scene filled with far more ammunition than any single eyewitness could track. They recovered 1940 caliber shell casings, 29mm casings, plus several additional casings belonging to another caliber investigators had not immediately identified. The 9mm casings were concentrated near the top of the stairs, while the .40 caliber shells sat mostly around the middle section. That physical separation showed at least 2 gunmen had fired from distinct positions, even though surviving witnesses could not clearly describe every person holding a weapon. The gate was riddled with bullet holes, while 6 rounds had punched completely into the house where Angelina and other people were trying to stay alive. The timing created another problem for anybody living nearby, since gunfire after midnight on the 4th of July could easily blend into fireworks exploding across Los Angeles. Several residents initially treated the sound like another round of holiday noise, leaving detectives with fewer immediate observations than such a violent attack normally produced. Surveillance cameras offered something more useful, although the footage showed moving cars and human shapes much better than recognizable faces. Detectives could see figures approaching Carla's property, fleeing shortly afterward, then disappearing into vehicles before patrol officers arrived around West 2nd Street. That left police with bodies, shell casings, wounded survivors, vehicle footage, and one strange clue developing roughly 6 miles away inside a hospital. LAPD officer Kevin Kohnberger had gone to that hospital while detectives were still processing Carla's property, intending to interview one of the people wounded during the Westlake shooting. During that visit, a 19-year-old named Art Tobias arrived with multiple gunshot wounds to his arm, although he had not been identified as one of Carla's guests. Tobias told Kohnberger he had been standing near a bus stop when a homeless black man suddenly approached and shot him without any apparent reason. He claimed an older motorist passing through the area had then picked him up and driven him to the hospital for treatment. Kohnberger thought the story sounded thin, especially once officers noticed the devil horn tattoos on Tobias's scalp and a facial tattoo insulting the 18th Street gang. Doctors planned surgery for Tobias, but he checked himself out after staff cleaned and bandaged the wounds, leaving before that operation could take place. At that stage, detectives could not prove his injuries had anything to do with the massacre unfolding across town, so the hospital visit remained an odd coincidence. Months later, however, Steve Happy Shim would give investigators an account that placed Tobias much closer to those West 2nd Street stairs. Shim said Jonathan Forrest Vasquez woke him roughly 90 minutes after the DIA group had gone out, telling him William Chucky Vasquez had been shot. That information sent Shim and Jonathan toward Carla's neighborhood, where they found police tape, reporters, emergency vehicles, and officers already controlling the block. Shim later said the group learned William had been taken to a Long Beach hospital after receiving a gunshot wound during the same sequence of events. According to Shim's later cooperation account, William, Gerardo Shy Boy Ferrardo, and Art Casper Tobias were the 3 men who approached Carla's house. Shim described William carrying the .40 caliber handgun, Gerardo holding the 9mm, while Tobias possessed a .32 caliber firearm during the attack. He also said William yelled an insult toward Rockwood before the shooting started, matching the retaliatory motive investigators were building around the neighborhood feud. The most chaotic part of Shim's version involved the shooters themselves, since he claimed members of the same crew accidentally put bullets into each other. Shim told detectives Tobias accidentally shot William during the gunfire, while Gerardo accidentally struck Tobias as the group fired around the crowded stairway. If Shim's account was accurate, 2 men involved in the attack left the scene carrying wounds caused by their own crew's crossfire. Tobias was taken to a different hospital from William, where the group allegedly coached him to claim a stranger had shot him near a bus stop. That cover story matched the version Tobias had already given Officer Kohnberger before investigators had any reason to connect him directly with Carla's property. After treatment, Shim said members regrouped, changed clothing, and secured firearms, while police remained several miles away trying to identify whoever had climbed those stairs. Even with those unusual hospital visits sitting in police files, the Westlake investigation did not immediately crack open during the summer of 2018. Witnesses remained reluctant inside a neighborhood where talking to detectives could create another set of problems, especially around Rockwood, DIA, and 18th Street territory. Cameras had captured vehicles and silhouettes without giving investigators the clean facial identifications needed to place every suspect directly inside the attack. The shell casings proved multiple weapons had been used, but none of that evidence alone gave detectives the names behind each gun. By the fall, the case had started going cold, until another Rockwood member was followed through a completely different part of Los Angeles. On October 7th, 2018, 25-year-old Jerry Plateau Ramos left a fried chicken restaurant on Crenshaw Boulevard around 8 o'clock after somebody had already been tracking his movements. Surveillance later showed a man dressed completely in black getting out of a white Toyota Corolla, following Ramos, then waiting outside while he went inside the restaurant. Once Ramos came back out, that man resumed following him down Crenshaw before closing the distance and opening fire from behind. According to the reconstructed sequence, the shooter kept firing after Ramos dropped, turning a targeted street attack into another killing connected to Rockwood. Ramos absorbed 9 gunshot wounds, with 8 rounds striking his torso and another hitting his head before he died at the scene. A nearby witness walking his dog became important after noticing an unfamiliar red Acura TSX parked along the route before any shots were fired. The man regularly walked that area and knew which vehicles usually belonged there, so the Acura had already caught his attention before Ramos was killed. After hearing around 10 shots, he watched a man dressed in black enter the passenger side of that same Acura before the vehicle pulled away. Investigators recovered 13 .40 caliber casings beside Ramos, while tattoos showing the letters R and W confirmed his documented Rockwood affiliation. Surveillance also placed additional vehicles around the killing, creating another multi-car pattern that looked a lot like the movements captured around Carla's neighborhood months earlier. The biggest break came from the ammunition itself, when firearms examiners compared those .40 caliber casings with evidence collected from West 2nd Street. The same .40 caliber handgun used to kill Jerry Ramos had also been fired during the 4th of July massacre at Carla's house 3 months earlier. Suddenly, the cold Westlake case was connected to a dead Rockwood member who had been followed, stalked, then shot repeatedly outside a Crenshaw restaurant. Detectives still needed names, vehicles, locations, and people willing to talk, but now they had one firearm physically tying both crime scenes together. Whoever had gone looking for Rockwood enemies during the summer appeared to have returned to the same feud in October, leaving investigators a trail they could finally start following. Jerry Ramos had been dead only a short time before detectives started pulling registration records from the vehicles moving around his Crenshaw Boulevard murder scene. The red Acura TSX came back to Steve Happy Shem, while the gold Dodge Neon belonged to William Chucky Vasquez. A white Toyota Corolla was registered to William's brother Jonathan Forrest Vasquez, giving investigators 3 owners connected to the same DIA circle. That connection mattered more once police confirmed all 3 men were documented Diablo members, moving around the same targeted Rockwood killing. Instead of chasing another faceless shooter, detectives suddenly had names attached to the cars surrounding Ramos before somebody walked him down. Investigators then placed a pole camera near Williams' family home, letting them watch which vehicles kept gathering around the same address. The camera captured Shem's Acura, Jonathan's Corolla, Williams' Neon, plus another vehicle detectives already recognized from Westlake. That 4th car was the gold Acura Legend seen circling Carla's neighborhood before 3 people walked toward her house on July 5th. Registration records connected the Legend to Mario Penruiz, another DIA member whose name had already surfaced around Carla's gathering. With that discovery, vehicles from 2 separate killings were now parking around the same crew, tightening the space investigators needed to search. That vehicle trail also brought detectives back to Art Casper Tobias, whose strange hospital appearance had been sitting unresolved since the massacre. Investigators identified Tobias as a DIA member, then pulled his booking photograph for Officer Kevin Kohnberger to examine months after their first meeting. Kohnberger recognized the same 19-year-old patient who arrived wounded while police were still dealing with bodies around Carla's West 2nd Street property. Tobias had claimed a homeless stranger shot him near a bus stop, while an older motorist supposedly carried him toward medical treatment. Once detectives connected Casper to Chucky, Forrest, Happy, and Penn, that random shooting story started looking less like bad luck. By January 2019, investigators had enough evidence to obtain arrest warrants for William Vasquez, Jonathan Vasquez, Art Tobias, Mario Ruiz, and Steve Shem. Police caught William on January 31st while he was riding inside his girlfriend's car, then quickly moved toward his home with a search warrant. Inside, officers found a .40 caliber handgun, ammunition, an extended 9mm magazine, 4 walkie-talkies, plus papers detectives interpreted as records of drug transactions. They also recovered a black ski mask, a Chucky doll referencing Williams' nickname, plus a Rockwood street sign with the gang's name crossed out. The title for Williams' gold Dodge Neon was there too, linking paperwork inside the residence directly back toward a vehicle investigators had already tracked. The handgun looked important at first, especially after .40 caliber ammunition connected the Westlake and Ramos scenes through the same murder weapon. Ballistics testing eventually ruled Williams' recovered firearm out, meaning police had not found the gun used at Carla's house or against Jerry Ramos. Even without that match, the walkie-talkies lined up closely with the communication system Shem would later describe inside DIA retaliation missions. Jonathan was arrested only hours after William, tightening police pressure on two brothers whose vehicles appeared around the October operation. Steve Shem was harder to reach, since Happy had already taken himself out of Los Angeles before detectives started closing those gaps. Detectives eventually tracked Shem to Las Vegas, where officers arrested him on February 25th while he was staying around fellow DIA member Gerardo "Shy Boy" Ferraro. Gerardo was briefly detained during that operation, then released while investigators concentrated first on Shem's connection to the Ramos killing. Once transported back toward Los Angeles, Shem initially denied being anywhere around the fried chicken restaurant when Ramos was followed through Crenshaw. Detectives pushed back with surveillance footage plus the witness who had noticed Shem's red Acura before hearing roughly 10 gunshots. Faced with his own car sitting inside their evidence, Happy changed directions and started giving investigators pieces of the crew. His first account placed William, Jonathan, and himself in separate vehicles around the restaurant while another DIA member handled the actual shooting. Shem claimed Art Tobias had stepped from Jonathan's Corolla, followed Ramos on foot, then opened fire before escaping toward the waiting cars. That story helped prosecutors charge Shem, William, Jonathan, and Tobias with Ramos's murder alongside firearm and gang sentencing enhancements. Each man pleaded not guilty, although Tobias himself remained out of reach while police continued trying to locate him. For almost 2 years, Shem stayed tied to a murder charge while the wider Westlake investigation remained connected through cars, shell casings, and old surveillance. Then November 2020 changed the whole setup when Shem accepted a cooperation agreement with the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. Prosecutors dismissed his Ramos murder charge, while Happy pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact in return for full cooperation against his former crew. The deal required him to disclose every crime he witnessed or joined, including gang structure, participants, weapons, drugs, planning, and violence. If investigators later discovered he deliberately withheld something important, the agreement could collapse and put the original murder exposure back on him. That condition turned Shem from another defendant into the person capable of explaining how several disconnected clues actually fit together. Happy described William as DIA's leader, with Jonathan or Jason Boxer stepping forward whenever Chucky was locked up or unavailable. He explained the drug money, firearms, 3-car retaliation system, plus walkie-talkies William allegedly distributed to reduce the cellular trail during street operations. He also filled in the July 2018 story, including the gathering at William's parents' house before members supposedly went looking for Rockwoods. Shem described William, Gerardo, and Tobias approaching Carla's property, then explained the friendly fire that wounded William and Casper during the shooting. Those details finally gave detectives an inside narrative matching hospital records, surveillance movements, weapon calibers, plus Tobias's suspicious bus stop explanation. Yet Shem still had another problem inside his original Ramos statement, since the man he initially named as the shooter was not the person he now identified. Happy admitted he had lied when blaming Art Tobias, explaining that he originally wanted to protect Gerardo Ferraro from the murder investigation. According to his corrected account, William learned a Rockwood member worked at the Crenshaw restaurant, then arranged for Shy Boy to handle the killing. William, Jonathan, and Shem positioned themselves in separate cars nearby, while maintaining a 3-way telephone call as they waited for Ramos. When Ramos appeared, Gerardo allegedly left Jonathan's Corolla, followed him down the street, then fired the rounds that ended his life. Gerardo's escape created another physical detail that Shem remembered clearly, since Shy Boy climbed a fence while running from the murder scene. He cut his hand badly enough to enter Shem's Acura bleeding, leaving Happy driving away with the alleged shooter beside him. The vehicles then convoyed toward Mario Ruiz's house, where Gerardo wrapped his injured hand before handing the firearm over to Jonathan. Jonathan unloaded that weapon and placed it inside his trunk, while Shem cleaned his Acura before falsely reporting his license plate stolen. William, Jonathan, and Jason later took Gerardo to a hospital, where Shy Boy claimed he cut himself jumping a fence while heading toward basketball. That fake hospital explanation gave investigators another strange echo from July, when Tobias had blamed his gunshot wounds on a stranger near a bus stop. Shem said William eventually called him with another instruction, telling Happy to leave Los Angeles while taking Gerardo and Tobias away too. Tobias was dropped at a bus stop before making his way toward Nebraska, while Shem and Gerardo headed together into Las Vegas. Once Happy admitted Gerardo had actually killed Ramos, the Ramos murder allegation against Tobias was dropped, although Casper still remained wanted over Westlake. Detectives now knew who Happy said planned the operations, who moved through which vehicles, and who supposedly fired during both attacks. What investigators still needed was something stronger than one cooperating gang member trading information for a lighter outcome after previously telling them a major lie. Gerardo remained dangerous to the case if he stayed silent, while Tobias could still deny every connection to Carla's stairs despite that suspicious hospital visit. The next opening came after Gerardo and Jason were eventually arrested, placing Shy Boy somewhere detectives could control much more carefully. Instead of confronting him with every piece of evidence immediately, investigators let another man inside the jail start a conversation with him. That decision would turn the case again, since Gerardo was about to describe both killings without realizing exactly who was listening. By May 6, 2021, detectives had spent years building their case, yet Gerardo Shy Boy Ferrardo still had not personally explained either killing. Police arrested Gerardo with Jason Boxer, placed them together briefly, then removed Jason for questioning without returning him to the same holding cell. That small movement immediately bothered Gerardo, who began wondering whether Boxer had started talking once detectives got him alone somewhere else. Investigators then placed Shy Boy beside a jailhouse informant, giving Gerardo somebody who looked like another inmate instead of another detective. Once the conversation started, Gerardo supplied details prosecutors had been waiting years to hear from somebody inside the crew. Gerardo introduced himself as Shy Boy from DIA, then described a 4th of July shooting involving Chucky and Casper, meaning William Vasquez and Art Tobias. He said the three of them ran toward a house where they expected Rockwood enemies, then opened fire after reaching the property. During that conversation, Gerardo said he focused on two people he could clearly see, later taking personal credit for hitting both of them. He also acknowledged learning afterward that a pregnant woman had died, although his statement never established who fired the fatal rounds, striking April. As the conversation continued, Gerardo suspected Tobias of cooperating and threatened violence, then extended that same suspicion toward Jason after remembering Boxer's unexplained removal. The informant kept listening while Gerardo moved into Jerry Ramos's October 2018 murder, giving investigators another account that matched Shem's corrected version. Gerardo described watching Ramos leave the Crenshaw restaurant, following him down the street drawing his gun, then firing before escaping across a fence. During that getaway, razor wire cut his hand badly, matching Shem's story about Shy Boy entering the waiting Acura while bleeding. Gerardo claimed he later broke the murder weapon apart and scattered the pieces through the desert, although investigators already knew that detail was false. Police had recovered the firearm during an unrelated arrest, leaving the rest of his account exposed against evidence detectives could independently check. 2 weeks later, on May 20th, detectives finally arrested Art Casper Tobias, then placed him with the same informant who had heard Gerardo talking. Tobias sensed the setup almost immediately, telling the man that police were probably listening while detectives tried getting them to discuss the case. Detective Luis Romero then began entering the cell periodically, dropping selected pieces of information before leaving Tobias alone with the informant again. After one visit, Tobias admitted he once carried a facial tattoo, removed it later, then grew his hair specifically to hide devil horn tattoos. Those details matched the wounded teenager Officer Kevin Kohnberger had encountered inside a hospital only hours after the Westlake massacre. Romero kept pressing in directly, while Tobias gradually corrected details detectives deliberately presented incorrectly during those conversations inside the holding area. When Romero suggested only 2 shooters had approached Carla's house, Tobias indicated 3 were involved, quietly matching the prosecution's reconstruction of that night. Tobias also discussed being shot 4 times, skipping planned surgery, then leaving the hospital before investigators could return looking for him. He described his injuries as friendly fire, while another exchange established that the crew parked before approaching the house instead of conducting a drive-by. Tobias even admitted spending several months in Nebraska afterward, giving police another detail matching Shem's account of members leaving California after the shooting. Romero also told Tobias that April Onofre's pregnancy meant prosecutors were treating the attack as 4 murders. not merely 3 deaths around Carla's property. The detective warned that harming women and children could create trouble inside the broader Sureño system influenced by the Mexican mafia. Within that structure, a green light can authorize violence against somebody accused of violating internal rules, carrying consequences beyond ordinary neighborhood retaliation. Investigators later intercepted communications showing a Mexican mafia member making inquiries about Westlake, which gave Romero's warning more weight inside the investigation. Still, nothing in the case confirms that anybody formally issued a green light against Tobias, William, Gerardo, Jason, or another DIA member. When the case finally reached trial, prosecutor Kevin Keelan built his presentation by connecting survivors, physical evidence, digital records, cooperation testimony, and jailhouse admissions. Carla described the barbecue and being shot 5 times, while Maricela explained pulling Angelina inside shortly before bullets tore through the stairway. Rodrigo described realizing the noise was gunfire after feeling blood running down his back, then calling 911 while wounded inside Carla's home. Keelan paired those accounts with surveillance showing the Gold Acura, companion vehicles, 3 approaching figures, plus the white getaway car leaving shortly afterward. Cell records further placed phones belonging to William, Jonathan, Mario Ruiz, and others around locations matching movements before and after the attack. Steve Happy Shim became the prosecution's inside witness, walking jurors through DIA's leadership, drug money, firearms, walkie-talkies, vehicle system, plus both killings. Gerardo's recorded statements supported Shim's corrected Ramos account, while Tobias's conversations tied Casper toward Westlake, friendly fire, hospital avoidance, and Nebraska. Defense attorneys attacked Happy's deal aggressively, pointing out that prosecutors dismissed his murder exposure after he agreed to testify against former friends. They also reminded jurors that Shim originally blamed Tobias for killing Ramos before changing his account and identifying Gerardo as the shooter. Other challenges targeted the jail recordings and cellular evidence, emphasizing that nearby phones could not establish whose hands actually held particular firearms. Those attacks failed to break the larger case, leaving William Vasquez, Art Tobias, and Gerardo Ferrardo convicted over the Westlake killings. Their murder convictions covered Junior Salinas, April Onofre, unborn Jay, Salinas Onofre, and Ruben Alcantara, while Carla, Maricela, and Rodrigo supported attempted murder counts. William and Gerardo were also convicted of murdering Jerry Ramos, bringing the October retaliation case into the same final courtroom reckoning. Jonathan Vasquez received 21 years after pleading no contest to voluntary manslaughter, while Art Tobias eventually received 142 years to life. William received 158 years to life. Steve Shim received roughly 18 months through his cooperation deal, while Jason received probation as an accessory. The trial concluded on August 11, 2024, yet Gerardo never reached the sentencing hearing that would have formally closed his own case. While awaiting sentencing inside a Los Angeles County men's jail facility, Shy Boy was stabbed to death shortly after the trial ended. One rumor blamed an unpaid drug debt, while another connected his killing to possible Mexican mafia punishment involving April and her unborn child. A third theory centered on Jason, whose light punishment fueled suspicions he cooperated, followed by allegations that the snitch label was redirected toward Gerardo. None of those explanations has been confirmed by prosecutors, corrections officials, or court filings, leaving his jailhouse killing unresolved beyond the death itself. Gerardo's death ended his personal case, though it did nothing to change what remained at Carla's West 2nd Street home years later. Carla survived 5 gunshots, while Junior, April, Ruben, and unborn Jay Salinas Onofre never walked away from the gathering beside that alley. Rockwood had grown from a neighborhood football club, while DIA developed from tagging culture before both groups became locked into territorial hostility. That feud eventually pulled William, Jonathan, Tobias, Gerardo, Shim, Mario Ruiz, Jason, Jerry Ramos, plus several families into the same chain of violence. For Carla's family, everything came down to one brutal geographic fact: their home stood beside a gang border they never created.